This podcast contains descriptions of violence against children and adult language and is not suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Hi everyone, and welcome to Suffer the Little Children, the true crime podcast giving voices back to the victims of child abuse and shining a harsh spotlight on the parents, guardians, and caretakers who silence them. I'm your host, Lane, and this is episode 84, Henry Anderson, Part 1. On April 23, 2020, 35-year-old Kellie Jo Anderson of Barnesville, Minnesota, arrived in the emergency room at a hospital 40 minutes from home with the bruised, unresponsive body of her 18-month-old foster son, Henry Anderson. When police questioned Kellie, she told them Henry was known to self-injure and had thrown himself around the bathroom that morning like a rag doll. Henry was pronounced dead early the next morning, and after an autopsy revealed the baby had endured unthinkable injuries, Kellie was charged with the murder of her foster son. This is the story of a loving, joyful little boy who, despite a rocky start, suffered no lack of love throughout his short life. It's also the story of the darkness no one knew boiled just beneath one woman's polished, perfect facade, and how that darkness erupted, leaving in its wake a child murdered and a family devastated. This is part 1 of the tragic story of Henry Anderson. Before I tell you today's story, I'd like to thank my newest patrons, Sherelle G. from Lehi, Utah, and Abilene L. and Ashley M., both from Washougal, Washington. I'd also like to give a second shout-out to another patron, Leah from Bell Gardens, California, because I mispronounced her name the first time around. Thank you all so much for supporting the show and helping me get closer to my goal. If anyone else would like to make a monthly pledge, you can do so at patreon.com/stlcpod. Today's story is both sad and infuriating, like most of the kids I talk about on the podcast. But it's especially so because the woman who took baby Henry's life chose to bring him into her home and care for him as her own child. There were multiple family members ready and willing to foster this perfect little boy, but she accepted the honor and the privilege of being Henry's mom, only to desecrate it. It's one of those stories that's just so unnecessary, and I wish I didn't have to tell it to you. But here we go. Kellie Jo Frovarp, who was born on December 6, 1984, was one of several children born to mother Angela Frovarp. After high school, Kellie obtained a nursing degree. In September of 2013, when she was not quite 29, Kellie and her boyfriend, 29-year-old Kyle James Anderson, announced their engagement. The couple was married on December 28, 2013, at Rock Prairie Church in Elbow Lake, Minnesota. They were living in Dilworth when their daughter, who I'll call E, was born in January of 2016. In 2017, they bought and settled into the house at 1001 9th Street Southeast in Barnesville, Minnesota. By all outward appearances, the Andersons were the ideal young family. No one had any idea the evil that lurked beneath Kellie's pretty blonde exterior. On October 18, 2018, in Fargo, North Dakota, one of Kyle's extended family members gave birth to a perfect baby boy she named Henry Thomas Anderson. Because Henry was born with methamphetamine in his system, he was removed from his mother's custody and placed with his maternal grandmother, Kayla Anderson, who lived in the small town of Wendell, where she owns a popular bar and grill named Benny D's. This was only a temporary placement, but Kayla was more than happy to care for her grandson until a permanent arrangement could be made. Henry brought a huge amount of joy into the lives of his family. His older sister, who I'll call H, especially adored baby Henry. A number of members of the extended Anderson family were willing to take Henry into their homes and foster him, but ultimately the decision was made that Kayla's cousin, Kyle, and his wife, Kellie, were the best choice. They had a young daughter who played beautifully with baby Henry. They had access to excellent daycare close to their home, and they were both young and able. Kyle and Kellie became licensed foster parents for the sole purpose of fostering Henry. In Minnesota, there are multiple steps to complete before a foster parent license is approved. Once the prospective foster parent has contacted the Minnesota Fostering Network and chosen an agency to assist them, they have to submit an application for child placement as well as an individual fact sheet, which requires the applicant to answer questions about their past drug and alcohol use, mental health, criminal history, and any involvement with social services or child protection agencies. Following that step, a background study is conducted for each household member aged 13 or older, and a social worker conducts a home study assessment, including a home visit and several interviews with each family member. Only after passing all of these steps can someone receive their foster care license, and once the license is issued, they have to go through the Minnesota Child Welfare Training System. The Andersons completed the entire process and received their foster parent license, and in April of 2019, 6-month-old Henry joined their household. Things seemed to go very well. Henry fit right into Kyle and Kellie's home, and Kellie provided the rest of the extended family with frequent, detailed reports of Henry's progress via text message. Henry spent every weekend with his grandma Kayla and the rest of the week in his new home. Henry attended daycare near the Anderson home. His daycare providers didn't notice anything strange. They, as well as family members of both Kellie and Kyle, occasionally noticed Henry turning up with various bumps and bruises, but these did not stand out, mainly because Kellie had plausible explanations for all of them. Everyone knows little kids, especially when they're newly mobile and learning to walk, are constantly incurring bruises and bumps. At one point, Henry suffered a broken leg, but again, Kellie had a plausible explanation for it. Eventually, so pleased with Henry's assimilation into their family, Kyle and Kellie made plans to officially adopt Henry in the summer of 2020. In the spring of that year, a startling incident took place in which Henry was airlifted to the hospital and nearly died after almost suffocating on a baby wipe that somehow became lodged in his throat. Henry's cousin, Sarah Losey, shared with me text messages she exchanged with Kellie about the incident. Kellie wrote, "So he's great. No cellular brain damage from the time he was unresponsive until pulse and respirations returned. Thank God for the fast responders and allowing me to be involved in the CPR to save him. He's happy, up, mind is clear, follows direction, and talks per usual. What a life-changing experience, but also shows how incredibly strong this little hero is. OMG, I just still can't get all this out of my head. Life can change in a split second/minute, and just prayed out loud in the ambulance for him to hold on to Henry and make him pull through. He's in good care here at Sanford Children's, continues to improve, off ventilator, on room air, drinking fluids, standing, trying to walk around, just incredible. He seems like such a chill baby but eats anything lately. Even had to remove garbage can the other day because he was eating everything he could because he is badly teething. We usually use a wet washcloth to chew on, and he somehow got a wet wipe on there and pocketed it in his cheek for some time, and when I noticed, he inhaled, and I wasn't able to get it. Had to call 911, and boy oh boy, my finger is almost chewed off. Cop couldn't get his jaw open and was trying so hard so we could get at the slimy wipe. Just so ridiculous and so preventable. I just cannot get over this. I promise he is well fed but just wants to put everything in his mouth, and I knew one day it would be something dangerous. God was there to help us all get him back to us, and he's okay, back to himself." Kellie went on to tell Sarah that her own daughter had also inhaled a baby wipe when she was 6 months old, saying it took place in the parking lot. Didn't realize she had inhaled a piece and was turning purple. I was screaming bloody murder and nobody came to help, but I did the baby Heimlich and was able to get it out. Interestingly, Kellie, a registered nurse, completely botched the spelling of the well-known Heimlich maneuver, which is used to dislodge an object from the throat of someone who's choking. Kellie spelled it Hymlic instead of the proper Heimlich. Nothing to do with anything. I just found that odd since she's in the medical profession. In the text messages, Kellie continued, "Henry's situation was different because as I tried to remove it, it went further down the pipe and totally cut off his airway. Anyways, EMTs used tweezers and removed it as he fought to keep his jaw shut. I did rescue breathing during the ambulance ride, and he vomited and finally got air, and that's when they sedated him and put him on vent in the helicopter. The EMTs weren't prepared for this situation, so I was glad because if I wouldn't have been there, they didn't do mouth-to-mouth, and I knew without a pulse and breathing he needed that. And they were messing around, and I was like, no, he needs air like now, and just jumped in and took over. Thank God they didn't try to remove me from the help because I was a screaming mess, just out of control, because was able to stay calm and figure out what he needed. Thank the Lord he's so strong, Sarah, and he's still with us. I wasn't going to just give up. Notice how Kellie positions herself as the indisputable hero in that situation. After Sarah commented on how thankful she was that Kellie saved Henry's life, Kellie replied, "Kyle doing great and so strong for us all. He's up there now because it's 24 hours per parent to switch off and couldn't mentally do another 24 after all that yesterday. I didn't sleep at all last night and am kinda a mess but calm now. Henry loves Kyle so much, so it will be nice for him to get a break from me. He's angry at me because he can't have food right now and is demanding num-nums and cries and cries. I did convince them to give him some milk and popsicles at least, and that did help. But he's great. No trauma to airway, which I was worried about. And he's okay. No brain damage, and God really did answer our prayers. Well, in the ambulance I was seeking God's strength, and to not let him go just wasn't going to accept that. Lord answered our prayers, and he's okay. So sorry for the awful news. So hard to hear these things. Hard for me to think about the whole sense because it changed me forever. I cannot stop crying over this. Ufta, just not the good Monday we were having. He also has hand-mouth-foot, so sores everywhere." The next day, Sarah checked on Kellie via text, and Kellie wrote back that she was getting ready to return to Henry's bedside at the hospital. "He may come home tomorrow or next day. He's running around yelling at the staff, eating, drinking well, has no medical cords or medications anymore, so he's basically being monitored right now. He's doing great, and thanks for asking, Sarah. So sorry to disappoint family and have such a tragic event that could have been prevented." Little did anyone know that in 3 weeks' time, another tragic, preventable event would take their baby Henry away from them forever. On Thursday, April 23, 2020, 35-year-old Kellie Jo Anderson burst into the emergency department at Sanford Medical Center in Fargo, North Dakota, carrying 18-month-old Henry, who was described in a criminal complaint as blue and lifeless with bruising to the face and head. Kellie first told medical staff and, later, law enforcement that because Henry had a low-grade fever of 99.8 degrees Fahrenheit that morning, she had kept him home from daycare. She said Henry was teething, and she could tell he didn't feel well. A doctor discovered that upon his arrival in the emergency room, Henry had fixed, dilated pupils, which does not normally occur until 10 minutes after death. Also, the doctor measured Henry's core body temperature, which was 82 degrees. This means that Henry had likely been dead for about 40 minutes. Coincidentally or not, that is just about how long it would take someone to drive from the Anderson home in Barnesville to Sanford Hospital in Fargo. The doctor also had concerns that Henry's multiple injuries were not consistent with Kellie's story. Based on the concerns of medical staff, the Barnesville Police Department and the Clay County Sheriffs were summoned to the hospital to investigate a report of child neglect. They observed multiple injuries on the child, including several bruises on his back and side, a bump on the back of his head, a cut on the inside of his lip, and numerous bruises and marks on his face and head, in addition to a deep laceration to his penis. Kellie told investigators she hadn't seen any injuries on Henry the night before. She explained that Henry had a habit of self-injuring, describing the 18-month-old child throwing himself around and feeling no pain. She said that around 12:30 p.m. on the day of the incident, she gave Henry a bath to make him feel good, and during that time, Henry threw himself several times from the bath to the toilet, causing injuries to his own mouth. She also told them she believed Henry had suffered a seizure earlier in the bathtub or shortly after she took him out. That, she explained, is why she took him to the emergency room. She told them that while she dropped her daughter off at daycare, across the street, at around 10 a.m., she left Henry at home alone but listened on a baby monitor the whole time. On the ride to the hospital, Kellie told police, she could hear Henry in his car seat, babbling, and his breathing sounded labored. A couple blocks from the hospital, she said, he stopped babbling, so she pulled over and was initially unable to find a pulse. Just when she was about to begin performing CPR on the baby, she noticed a faint pulse, so she hopped back in the driver's seat and proceeded to the emergency room. Based on the doctor's opinion that Henry had been dead for 40 minutes before arriving at the hospital, police were highly suspicious of Kellie's claims. Kellie also admitted to investigators that she and Kyle had discussed calling off their planned adoption of Henry, and that Kyle had threatened to divorce her, as she was supposedly the only one who wanted to adopt the little guy. Officers also interviewed Kyle Anderson, who had been at work when Henry entered the hospital, Kyle told them he had last seen Henry around 7:30 p.m. the evening before, which was April 22nd. Kyle said he played with the kids, meaning the couple's biological daughter E and Henry, for a while before retreating to the garage to do some woodworking. At this point, he told investigators, Kellie became angry with him, saying he should pay more attention to the kids. At around 8 p.m., Kyle said he gave Henry a bath. He had recently taken over bathing Henry because Kellie had a hard time with the task. Interesting, then, that Kellie would claim to have given the baby a bath the next morning. At the time he gave Henry a bath, Kyle said he saw no injuries on his foster son. When investigators asked, Kyle told them Henry had never had a seizure before. While being given a bath, Kyle said Henry would sometimes do what he called an alligator roll, which I assume was kind of a spinning maneuver to try to escape the bath, but he never threw himself around the way Kellie described. Kyle was initially doubtful that his wife would have injured Henry, but after seeing the toddler's condition not long before Henry was pronounced dead at 6:42 a.m. on Friday, April 24th, Kyle told investigators he couldn't believe the injuries were self-inflicted. Police, armed with a search warrant, spent over 12 hours combing the Anderson home for evidence. Remember Kellie's story about listening for Henry on the baby monitor while she dropped E off at daycare? No baby monitor was located on the property. Kellie was arrested on Thursday, April 23, 2020, on a charge of felony criminal neglect and booked into North Dakota's Cass County Jail. The baby's body was transported to the Ramsey County Medical Examiner's office, where a preliminary autopsy was performed. The autopsy confirmed investigators' findings, listing injuries to the baby's head, face, arms, chest, back, legs, hand, foot, and genitals, as well as internal injuries. Henry's manner of death was determined to be homicide, likely caused by asphyxia associated with blunt force trauma. On Monday, April 27th, official charges were filed in Clay County District Court, adding a charge of second-degree murder to Kellie's neglect charge. If convicted, she could spend up to 40 years in prison. On Tuesday, April 28th, she was extradited back to Minnesota, where she was booked into the Clay County Jail around noon and held on a bond of $1 million. The Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension assisted the Barnesville Police Department and the Clay County Sheriff's Office with the investigation. The Minnesota Department of Human Services, saying that the health and safety of children in Kellie's care are in imminent risk of harm, suspended the Andersons' foster care license, effective Saturday, April 25th. In August of 2020, with Kellie in jail on criminal charges, Kyle Anderson filed for dissolution of the marriage with child from his wife. In the divorce matter, Kyle was represented by attorney Timothy Paul Hill. Kellie was granted in forma pauperis, meaning she was indigent and could not afford court costs. The couple's marriage was officially dissolved by Judge Tammy L. Merkins on May 19, 2021. In a weird little sidetrack, Kellie's family blew up tiny portions of the internet the week of Henry's death, with attempts to salvage Kellie's reputation in the comments of various news articles about the case posted on Facebook. On one of Kellie's own past photo posts, there was a back and forth between her uncle, Steve Smezrud, and some commenters, including members of Henry's biological family, among others. Steve's comments leaned very heavily in the direction of victim blaming, even implying with one comment that Henry, who was, remember, just 1.5 years old, was fucked in the head. Kellie's mother, Angie, implied that Henry's biological mother's meth addiction had caused mental or behavioral problems in the baby. This is false, according to Henry's grandma Kayla and cousin Sarah. Angie spent a lot of time and effort blaming the victim for causing his own injuries and spouting off about what a great mother Kellie is. As we've seen in the past, being a great mother to one child doesn't preclude abuse of another child. Angie downplayed the injuries Henry suffered to a ridiculous degree. Henry was taken to the hospital because he didn't look well. Kellie was arrested at the hospital after Henry's death. One woman mentioned in the comments on a Valley News Live post that she was with her daughter in the pediatric intensive care unit at Sanford Hospital when Henry was admitted, and that she saw the baby's injuries in person. He looked like someone tried to beat him to death. I'll never forget it. Another commenter claimed to have reported Kellie in the past for child abuse, although no details of that complaint were given. The Andersons displayed vastly more decorum than Kellie's family did. Within a few weeks of Henry's death, They began raising funds to build a toddler park in Henry's honor in Wendell, a town of less than 200 people, where his grandparents made sure everyone in town knew their adorable grandson. Several family members spoke with a WDAY reporter. Henry's young cousin, Kira Losi, said, "He's our little boy. We love him. We'll miss him." Katie Anderson, Henry's aunt, added, "It only happens to other people. You read about it. Here you are. It's real, and it happened to our family." The family told the reporter they missed Henry's wild, curly blonde hair and joyful demeanor. Cousin Sarah Losi said he was very curious, very loving, always smiling. To honor and remember Henry and to share his joy with other children, the family planned to build a toddler park in Wendell, which is full of young families. The park would feature spring-loaded bounce toys, a teeter-totter, and small swings. Although the good times children would have at the park would never make the pain of Henry's loss go away, they felt it would help them with their grieving process to watch other small children smile like Henry did. When asked what the purpose of the park would be, Sarah explained, "Have fun, be safe, and remember our little Henry." Sarah created a Facebook page called 50 States for Baby Henry, #Justice for Baby Henry, where she sold Justice for Baby Henry t-shirts for 2 reasons. 1, Sarah's aim was to garner support for Henry in all 50 states, and on the Facebook page, photos abound of supporters from all over the country wearing their Baby Henry t-shirts. The second reason, of course, was to support the playground fundraiser. After the campaign raised several $1,000s, the family bought playground equipment, and family members set to work building and placing the toddler equipment in a playground in Wendell. I included photos of the playground, including a bench dedicated to Baby Henry, in the Facebook photo album I've created for this episode. In January of 2021, Kellie Jo Anderson was seen in court via video conference for a pretrial hearing before Judge Jade Rosenfeld. During the hearing, Kellie's omnibus hearing was waived, and the judge scheduled a settlement conference in the case to take place in May. In the event that the case was not disposed during the settlement conference, Judge Rosenfeld also scheduled Kellie's 1-day jury trial to take place the following week. As I mentioned earlier, Kellie's second-degree murder charge carried a sentence of up to 40 years in prison, but because Minnesota's sentencing guidelines are based on a grid that takes criminal history into consideration, Kellie, who had no criminal history, would normally be sentenced to prison time for a term of 261 to 367 months. In April of 2021, however, Clay County prosecutors filed a motion for aggravated sentencing, alleging in the motion that Henry died from a vicious animalistic assault by his foster mother. The 4 aggravating factors to be examined were Henry's vulnerability due to his age, the particular cruelty of the attack, Kellie's role as a trusted figure, and the fact that the assault happened in a zone of privacy. A hearing was held on the motion via video conference on Monday, April 12th, which Kellie again attended remotely from jail. In the motion, prosecutors alleged, "Based on the nature of these injuries, it can be inferred that Henry experienced agonizing pain during the entire beatdown inflicted by Kellie." Kellie told investigators that Henry's breathing was labored on the drive to the hospital, although the fact that he had been dead for approximately 40 minutes prior to arrival seems to belie that statement. She said she stopped in a McDonald's parking lot near the hospital, noticed Henry was not breathing and had no pulse, and planned to administer CPR until a witness told her to go to the hospital instead. The motion filing stated that the same witness noticed blood on Henry's face and believed the baby had been struck by something. According to the medical examiner, Henry's death by asphyxiation may have been caused by someone placing their hands over his mouth. The filing also stated that the medical examiner expressed extreme concern about the injuries to Henry's genital area and opined that Henry's injuries were less consistent with self-harm and more consistent with physical abuse. Judge Rosenfeld gave Kellie's defense attorney, Daniel Hopper, until April 22nd to submit a response to the aggravated sentencing motion, which would increase her sentence should she be convicted. Mr. Hopper intended to use voluntary intoxication as his client's defense. A week before her trial was scheduled to begin, at a court hearing on Monday, May 3, 2021, 36-year-old Kellie Jo Anderson pleaded guilty to her second-degree felony murder charge. The original charge, stating she killed the baby with intent, was dismissed in exchange for her guilty plea. During the hearing, Kellie wept as she recounted her attack on the helpless toddler. She said that morning she kept Henry home from daycare because he was running a fever, although she couldn't recall the exact sequence of events due to medication she was taking at the time that clouded her recollection. Kellie told the judge she remembered noticing Henry had cut his mouth during his bath, and she was frustrated that she couldn't stop the bleeding. She then hit him several times. "I didn't know exactly why I did what I did. I don't know why I reacted like that." She admitted to the court that Henry was not breathing when she drove him to the hospital in Fargo. She performed CPR on the baby before loading him back into the vehicle. After the hearing, Kellie was remanded back to the Clay County Jail to await sentencing. At Kellie's sentencing hearing on June 18, 2021, she received the expected sentence of 35 years in prison after accepting the plea agreement in May. Kellie is expected, under Minnesota law, to serve about 2/3 of her sentence in prison and the rest on supervised release, meaning she will likely remain behind bars for approximately 23 years. When she's released from prison, she will be nearly 60 years old. During the sentencing hearing, multiple members of Henry's family read victim impact statements before the court. Henry's grandma, Kellie, told Judge Rosenfeld that she visited Henry in the hospital after the attack that killed him, and she addressed other family members in the courtroom when she told them, "Every single one of you gave him a kiss that day in his hospital bed. Our hearts ache. Day after day they ache. Henry will be forever missed. He will never be forgotten. There's nothing about him to forget." Henry's cousin, Sarah Losey, gave a victim impact statement for herself and gave statements on behalf of other relatives as well. She, like multiple others in the courtroom, wore a blue Justice for Baby Henry t-shirt. Sarah tearfully told the court that she felt guilt over Henry's death for several reasons, including not trying harder to become Henry's permanent caregiver, not seeing through Kellie's fake shell, and, in her eyes, for letting Henry down. She said she has tried therapy to reduce the guilt she feels. In the statement of one of Henry's great-grandmothers, the court heard, "It should never have happened. I think Kellie needs to have a long sentence because no one should do that to a baby." Another family member told Kellie directly, "You're a monster. I hate you so much." Henry's cousin said in a video recording, "Imagine Henry's pain when his caretaker, his foster mom, his protector, and a nurse brutally and viciously murdered him." Henry's uncle said to Kellie, "I believe this is the ultimate sin and the ultimate crime. I hope you will never hold a baby or child in your arms again." Kellie Jo Anderson read from her own prepared statement, although much of it was garbled and indecipherable. She read, "The biggest disappointment in my life is hurting someone I loved. I'm very sorry. There's nothing I can say that will help." Clay County Chief Assistant Attorney Pam Foss told the court, "When we talk about justice for Henry, that's hard to do. What this family wants is their child back, and we can't do that." Ms. Foss said at the sentencing hearing that Kellie tried to minimize her culpability in Henry's death by claiming she was under the influence of drugs at the time, but that there was no evidence to support her excuse. She also said it was believed Henry was dead before Kellie loaded him into her vehicle and drove him 40 minutes to an emergency room in Fargo, North Dakota. Ms. Foss told the judge it was a miracle that hospital staff was able to revive Henry even briefly when he arrived at the hospital. While handing down Kellie's sentence, Judge Rosenfeld said the attack on baby Henry can only be described as heinous. She said Kellie's 35-year sentence was significantly higher than state sentencing guidelines would dictate, which was only allowable due to the severe aggravating factors of Henry's murder. Several days after being sentenced, Kellie was transferred to the Women's Correctional Facility in Shakopee, Minnesota, which is the same prison where one of the offenders in last week's episode, namely Sarah K. Hallow, is incarcerated. To make this story even sadder, Henry's now 14-year-old sister, H., has endured yet another tragedy. In mid-April of 2021, her father, Mike, unexpectedly passed away. This poor girl has endured more tragedy in 1 year than most people could ever contemplate, and my heart is broken for her. Last week, I was honored to speak with two of Henry's closest family members, his grandma, Kellie Anderson, and his cousin, Sarah Losey. I'm going to end today's episode here, but I'll play that conversation next time. Again, instead of waiting till next week to release part 2, I'm going to get it out within a day or two. I'd like to end this episode the way I love best, by focusing on Henry. On the family's GoFundMe page, they wrote, "Henry was a vibrant boy, full of life, and he had a smile that lit up a room. Henry spent a lot of time with his grandma Kayla, who loved him so much. Henry was a sweet and happy little boy who touched so many hearts. Henry was a special little boy, and his extended family were a big part of his life. Kayla and Sarah told me Henry was a normal little boy who met all of his developmental milestones on time, if not early. He loved playing with toys, especially the magnetic toys his grandma had at her house, and he had a habit of making the most adorable elephant noises. He was a very cuddly baby, and he absolutely adored his big sister, who was just as enamored with him. Henry sounds like just the biggest little love, and I'm grateful to Kayla and Sarah for helping me share his story with you, especially because this week, Henry would have celebrated his 3rd birthday. My sources for this episode were Valley News Live, Bring Me the News, KFGO, the Fergus Falls Daily Journal, the Minnesota Department of Human Services website, Facebook, the Clay County Sheriff's Office website, Inforum, the Brainerd Dispatch, GoFundMe, Find a Grave, Minnesota Court Records Online, or MCRO, Kayla Anderson, and Sarah Losi. That's it for this episode. Join me next time for the rest of Henry's story. If you like the show, please follow or subscribe to Suffer the Little Children on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, Spreaker, Pandora, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast listening app. And please leave me a 5-star rating and a positive review on your favorite podcast platform. Visit the website at sufferthelittlechdrenpod.com, where you can listen to episodes or become a patron for rewards ranging from a shout-out by name on the show to bonus content and exclusive gifts. Follow the podcast on Facebook, Instagram, Tumblr, and Pinterest at Suffer the Little Children Pod, and on Twitter and TikTok at STLCpod. View photos related to today's episode on Facebook and Instagram. For more stories like the one you heard today, visit sufferthelittlechildrenblog.com. This podcast is researched, written, hosted, edited, and produced by Lane. All music for the show is licensed from audiojungle.net. Email tips, comments, questions, or case suggestions to sufferthelittlechildren.pod@gmail.com. For more information about preventing or reporting child abuse, visit childhelp.org or call your area's child abuse hotline. If you see something, say something. Until next week, bye everyone.